Hey, everybody. Welcome to our interview sessions for the Bellevue Democrats. We are taking on topics that we want to be more educated about and learn how to approach our lawmakers with ideas about how to better serve our constituents and what we are voting for. So today we have Dr. Marisa Richmond here. She has a AB from Harvard, an MA from Berkeley, and a PhD from George Washington University. So very, very educated. She is now a professor of the Women's and Gender Studies at MTSU. Welcome, Marisa, and tell us, what is Women's and Gender Studies?
Well, the Women's and Gender Studies program, and it's not a degree program. So I actually teach in the Department of History, and then the Women's and Gender Studies program, we come from all of the various disciplines: English, drama. I teach a class on gender identity and sexuality from the perspective of an historian. And then, like I said, my other colleagues, they look at literature and sexuality, the roles of women in the arts, and all sorts of things. So we cover a wide range of topics within the program, but it specifically tries to elevate, just like Black Studies elevates the roles of Blacks, and Hispanic Studies, Hispanics, and so on. The Women's and Gender Studies program does that specifically for women and gender issues in general.
So you have a lot to bring to the table with this. You're a member of the transgender community. You are African American. You're a woman. So how do you feel that all helps you bring into these studies and be able to talk about these issues?
Well, obviously, one of the big words that's popped up over the last 10, 20 years is intersectionality. So I bring multiple perspectives. Certainly, Black women have had unique struggles separate from those of Black men, dating back to slavery when my ancestors were being raped. And those of us in the Black community are well aware of the fact that in many ways, almost all of us are multiracial. And so we deal with those issues. Obviously, we just celebrated a little less than a year ago the 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote. But particularly for women of color in various states, there continued to be additional barriers. Tennessee, we had the poll tax. In several other southern states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, they had literacy tests. So they had provided additional barriers for Black women in particular. I point out in my classes the scene in the movie Selma, where the old Black woman played by Oprah Winfrey went in to register to vote. And Blacks had been voting since the 1860s. Women had been voting since the 1920s. But that county clerk there was determined to keep her from voting, and he succeeded in that one particular scene. So that's one of the things that I try to address in all of my classes, not just my Women's and Gender Studies class. To try to make sure that people understand that women, and in particular women of certain ethnicities, do face additional struggles and additional barriers.
Right, and it's just like the ban on teaching the critical race theory. They passed the bill to ban that in Tennessee.
Right. Yeah, I just posted a story a couple days ago about Frances Thompson of Memphis, a Black woman who was attacked and beaten during the Memphis race riot, and she testified before Congress about that. She was a survivor, fortunately. And then later it was discovered she was trans, and so she was thrown in a men's prison. So her story intersects race and gender, and so and that's a Tennessee story, and the bill that tries to stop LGBTQ issues from being discussed in school curricula would deny the right to tell her story. And if this so-called critical race theory bill is also signed, then we can't even talk about the Memphis race riot and the issues that Frances Thompson discussed in that congressional hearing. And So all of these bills, as I pointed out in a press conference the other day, it's anti-free speech, it's anti-intellectual, it's anti-education in all respects.
Well, take us through the transgender discriminatory bills that were passed.
Oh, geez. Well, there's 5 anti-LGBT bills. Hold on, I got a list here. Got so many of them this year. Well, the first one he signed, of course, was the anti-trans sports bill. These bills started popping up last year around the country, and they really gained momentum this year. And several southern states passed them, and one of them was Tennessee, because of this myth that trans athletes will dominate women's sports and deny women the right to earn scholarships under Title IX and the like. Now, of course, that's pure myth. All the way around. There's only a handful of people even coming out of the closet at the high school level, usually 1 or 2 per class, and most of them never play sports. And if they do, they just want to be participants, just play. But again, this was part of the myth that's taking place. The second one that was signed, I just mentioned a second ago, was the curriculum opt-out bill. That's a broader LGBTQ bill that applies to all, but says basically, if you're going to discuss, we don't want you discussing LGBTQ issues in school, and if you do, then my child, I want removed from that class. So basically, this is encouraging people to grow up ignorant and uninformed. And like I said, it's anti-education. The third one was the school bathroom bill. We've been fighting for this one, against this one. Well, there were 2 versions of the bathroom bills. The first one was specific to schools, to single out and segregate trans students, to separate them, and thus it would out them, force them into single-sex or single-use, single-person bathrooms. The Supreme Court ruled on that sort of issue way back in the 1940s that you cannot have facilities set up for one person because the state of Texas tried to create a law school for one Black person to keep that Black person out of the University of Texas Law School. And so that case, Sweat versus Painter, said that was unconstitutional. So we believe this particular bill is also unconstitutional based on Sweat versus Painter. Then the second one has to do with bathroom signs, forcing businesses to put up a ridiculous discriminatory sign that's blown up social media all over the country. And then the fifth and last bill, just signed a few days ago, was the one that would deny gender appropriate health care to transgender youth. We believe that this will lead to more depression and possible suicide for those who are starting to come out at these earlier and earlier ages. The adults, we've tried to pave the way, making it easier for young people, because we remember what it was like to be in the closet and to be alone and isolated. So we've tried to create more opportunities for those who feel comfortable coming out. Not everybody is. Many still have very unsupportive families, unsupportive schools or churches. And so for many are not going to come out in high school. But for those who are in a position where their families are supportive, there are informed medical professionals around the country, certainly some here in the state of Tennessee. And this is now saying we're not even going to allow you to get appropriate care, and just telling us what to do with our bodies. And it's just, again, we believe blatantly discriminatory and potentially very dangerous.
Well, that's what circling back. It's like, are these unconstitutional? Will they stand?
Well, and like for instance, with the school bill, the curriculum bill, again, I believe that's anti-First Amendment, telling people what you cannot say. What's the whole point of freedom of speech if you're telling people what you cannot say? Or even with the signage bill, telling somebody you must say something. Again, those are anti-First Amendment. The school bathroom bill, I pointed out several years ago when I testified in a House subcommittee against that bill, this was either potentially anti-Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures, or anti-14th Amendment against equal protection of the laws. And if there's enforcement, then you're violating somebody's constitutional rights under one of those two clauses. And if there's no enforcement, then there's no point in having this bill in the first place.
Yeah. So hopefully they'll all be challenged.
I know specifically for Tennessee, the ACLU of Tennessee is looking for plaintiffs. Some of the other groups like Lambda Legal, they may be looking for plaintiffs, because I know the ACLU sometimes can get overwhelmed, especially from Tennessee. I was in a courtroom with an ACLU lawyer a few years ago, and she said, some people think all we do is sit around doing our nails waiting for the phone to ring, and it's not that way at all. You know, they're inundated with complaints, and they can't take every single case. There are just so many of them. And so we hope that some of these bills will be prioritized, and that if they can't take them, then maybe ACLU or Lambda, or excuse me, a Lambda Legal might be willing or able to pick up some of the other ones.
Well, I'm seeing an issue here too, because it's like, you talk about they're making up bills that really nobody's being affected by right now. But it also makes it easier for if there's no complaints, say, to the ACLU, because there isn't a problem, then it's just kind of sitting there, and the bill still has been passed and is legal. And so do you think we're going to have enough people with complaints to challenge?
With the bathroom bill, absolutely. I mean, people are furious over that one. As far as specifically the sports bill, I'm not sure how many people want to play sports. And for those who do, some of the kids may tell their parents, oh, don't say anything. I don't want any problems. So some families may be afraid to file a lawsuit, although there's anonymity, especially when you're talking about minors. But some of the children may not want to cause issues, may not want this brought up. That's why we're pushing hard, especially right now in the U.S. Senate, for the Equality Act, because the language is pretty broad and would cover almost all of these 5 bills, would help us get rid of them immediately if we could pass that. It's already passed in the House, and we're pushing hard to pass that in the Senate now, and this is why.
So the bathroom bill, is that even enforceable?
Well, the signage bill. Well, I'll start with the school bill. If a school refuses to comply, I don't know what they're going to do to the school. What are they going to do to the principal? It depends on what the school board says or what the superintendent of that particular district says. Are they going to discipline that particular school principal for refusing to comply? Because that school principal says, well, first, I take this Constitution first and foremost. We'll have to see what happens. As far as the signage bill, I'm already seeing some business owners saying, well, I'm going to put up a second sign saying, screw the Tennessee legislature. Here's the names of the people and that you should write to, and here's who we need to remove. And we're going to invest in the next campaigns to remove these bigots. And so there are a lot of supportive businesses who are outraged, find this offensive, and they're going to fight back.
Yeah, I'm going to make a sign for my business that's kind of just the opposite of what they want.
Right. Yeah, and dare the state to come in and fine uncooperative businesses. Like, well, we don't like the fact that you are open and affirming.
Right. Yeah. Talk about the violence that's occurring against transgender women.
Oh, I think we're
addressing that.
Yeah. We've had an issue for years of violence, particularly against Black and Hispanic trans women. Vicious, violent, brutal murders, ones that in a sense sort of desecrate our bodies. We're up to, I think I just saw 25 this year. We haven't even reached the halfway point of the year. We've already had 25 murders around the country. Almost all are Black or brown trans women. Um, and, people just think it's okay to wipe us out, to try to remove us from the face of the earth. President Biden, to his credit, has spoken out against the violence. And more people are starting to recognize the epidemic nature of this violence. We tend to be murdered in groups of one or two, so we don't have like we saw in Atlanta with the attack upon the Asian women who were working in the massage parlor, to where we had a large number in one small area, or as we saw in El Paso a year or two ago at the shopping center, or I guess it was a flea market or something, where a large number of Hispanic shoppers, people just going about their daily business, were murdered. So we don't have like that large number of people in one single place. So it's like the steady drip of murders, but the numbers are insane. And we do, of course, have at the federal level the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Act. One of the things we're pushing for around the country is stronger enforcement of that law. Tennessee did pass a law in 2000 that said real or perceived gender, and the Attorney General said, we believe that includes transgender people. But in all these years, there's not, and it's a sentencing enhancement bill, but there has never been a single use of that language in all these years, in 20 years since that was adopted in the state of Tennessee. We had a case right after the 2016 election in Cookeville where a trans woman had her pickup truck torched and a political message spray painted on the side. And the Putnam County Sheriff said, oh, this isn't a hate crime.
Right. So these are happening, but they're not being prosecuted as hate crimes.
Precisely.
When they should be. What do you see coming up for next year? Have you heard anything about, are there more?
Well, there's, I'm just looking here. There was at least 3 additional bills. No, 2 of them were repeats, one having to do with LGBTQ content in schools, and another one related to healthcare for youth. So since those 2 were signed by the governor already, 2 versions of that, I believe those 2 bills probably won't move. But there was a 3rd bill that would affect training in government or businesses, and would allow people to get out of training, diversity training, if they didn't like the content. And the whole point of training is to educate people about diversity issues. And we do that here in Metro Nashville. I serve with the Human Relations Commission, and we do them twice a year for the police academy. And it's required to graduate from the police academy to go through this training. And this bill, if they were to well, it's already filed, so they just didn't move it in 2021, but it's still technically alive. And if they come back in January, said, okay, we're ready to move now, the bill's already in, they could pick it up on day one and start to fast track that. And we don't want this ban on training. And who knows what else they might come up with between now and January. We've learned from experience that election years are often pretty horrible because they need to go home and claim that they're protecting these so-called Tennessee values. And so, we don't know what's on their agenda for next year. But that's one bill that's already in the office of the clerks, and they could pick it up at any time.
Yeah, so we can just continue with all this next year. It's
correct. Yeah, and I suspect that it will continue in some form.
Yeah. Yeah, my interview this morning with Amanda Kell, she was talking about how what they want to do is if they find you not adhering to the law, they'll pull your funding. If you're a school or whatever, they will take away whatever funding they can, which is not fair as well.
We've talked about that at the federal level with these school bills, that potentially they're in violation of Title IX. And the Biden administration says we interpret the sex discrimination clause in Title IX to cover all of this. And so potentially Tennessee could lose funding, but then the people who would be hurt would be the students and the teachers who are supportive. When we really need to be going after the politicians. They're the ones responsible for these laws, not the kids. And so while that Title IX angle in pulling funding is one thing that we could do, I'm a little reluctant to really advocate for that as an educator myself. We need to be putting more money into public
Right.
schools, not less.
Right, we need more funding, especially in Tennessee. We're sitting on this billions of dollars reserve and not even, using it. We're just
Right.
hoarding money when we could be putting it into our schools. So colleges, at a college level, there's obviously more diversity classes, more diversity training. Are they really targeting K through 12 with trying to take out, the diversity and the race conversations? Is that where they're really going after right now?
Yeah, K through 12, because the feeling is, well, in college, one thing, in women's and gender studies, that's an elective. So people are there by choice. They're adults also. Now, kids today, they're a lot better informed than we were in my age. They have access to the internet. They're able to see things on multiple cable channels that were just simply not available in my era when we had 3 channels and the remote control was the youngest child who had to get up and go turn the channel. And so it's a different world. And we have these legislators who are still living in a box and they don't, and they're horrified. Maybe they don't watch those shows, and that's their prerogative. We should have freedom of choice. But the fact is, there's a lot of people who are informed. And the kids, again, because they have access to the internet, they're looking up information about themselves. And so they know what's happening and they're talking about it with their friends. Some schools have GSAs, and other places they're finding supportive friends and they're able to find peer support even without any formal structure. So discussions on these issues do take place to one degree or another. And these legislators are just simply out of touch.
Well, what do you think is the biggest the biggest misconception or thing people don't know about the transgender community? And what's the one thing that is causing all this fear? A lot of lesbian and gay rights have been initiated, gay marriage, and so this seems to be the thing everybody now is scared of. Why?
One thing, they think we're a bunch of sexual predators, and that was one of the things that held back the gay and lesbian community for so many years. They're now applying those same myths and those same stereotypes to us. I once had a legislator say to my face, "I want to take a gun and blow your brains out." I've never attacked a single child in my life. I'm an advocate for safety. I've done trainings with domestic violence shelters. I've just toured the sexual assault center here in Nashville a couple weeks ago. So I'm concerned with public safety for all people, all genders and all ages, because a lot of children are vulnerable. And the idea that we go into bathrooms or anywhere else looking to attack children is ridiculous. But yet they keep promoting this myth and this stereotype that we're the threat, and we're not the threat. We're the ones in danger.
How did they also make it an issue that that transgender women were going to take over sports and just start dominating sports? I don't. How did that come about?
To be honest, I'm not sure, but I actually the last time I taught my trans studies class, I brought this up 2 years ago. I teach it in odd number years, so I have the class this fall. And so I talked about that issue with regard to Dr. Renee Richards when she wanted to play women's tennis. in both the U.S. Open and World Team Tennis, that myth was being promoted then, that all these mediocre male tennis players would suddenly change their gender and take over women's tennis. Well, she never, she won like a minor tournament, but she certainly never made a big splash in the U.S. Open, and nobody has done so either. And even where trans people are playing women's sports, they're not dominating. Now there may be one or two who are successful, but nobody is dominating. The International Olympic Committee allows trans women to compete, but we're not racking up the gold medals. We're not racking up state championships at the high school level or NCAA championships. We're not taking all these scholarships, although I argue that trans people have every right to compete for scholarships, whether athletic scholarship or academic scholarship, because we deserve the right to go to college and be successful like every other group. And so, this is just pseudoscience, something that these right-wing groups have created for fundraising purposes. Because you mentioned marriage, that issue has been resolved, although they're still trying to find angles to the Supreme Court to challenge it. But the Supreme Court ruled on that 6 years ago, and the world didn't go to hell in a handbasket, or at least not be for. If it did, it wasn't for that reason. And so, they're looking for new angles, new issues, new demons to challenge. And there we were. They had been ignoring us for years, and suddenly you're like, oh, here's our next target. Convenient. They're already there. They're speaking up, so let's go after this group now.
So I believe I believe you said that transgender athletes can compete in the NCAA.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, the National Center for Lesbian Rights worked with them on their policy. And so, yes, there is a trans policy for the NCAA, and a number of colleges and a number of conferences have adopted that policy. And that includes Conference USA, which includes MTSU. And of course, the school itself has a non-discrimination policy, and so does Vanderbilt. I know several SEC schools have adopted a similar policy, although I don't think the conference as a whole has done so. But we're seeing this already happening.
Where are we at with military service with transgender members?
Yeah, well, as you know, the Trump administration tried to repeal the policy that had been adopted by the Obama administration. We fought back in court for literally 4 years nonstop. And of course, the Biden administration has now completely reversed that policy. And so we've made real progress there. So people can serve under their gender.
What about documentation now? I'm just kind of going through a list, see where we're at right now. What about documentation, passports, driver's license?
Okay. Well, there are two levels. First, the federal documents. So you mentioned passports. There's Social Security. There's those are both easy to change. And then, of course, it's like a DD something or another. I forget the exact number for military IDs. That can be changed. Foreign birth certificates for people born to U.S. parents out of the country, whether they work for a private company, military, embassy employees. Because I was actually on a call a few days ago, and a couple of parents said our child was born in Germany. I was like, oh, actually, that's good. You can get the State Department issues those birth certificates. So those sorts of IDs are easy to change. And there's now even a push to add a gender neutral category, a third category for more non-binary people. Then, of course, there are the state documents. And for the state of Tennessee, you start with your name change. Name changes vary from state to state. Tennessee may be the easiest state in the country. Um, some states require you to have an attorney. Tennessee does not. Some states require newspaper publication. Tennessee does not. Some have filing fees upwards of $1,000. For Tennessee, it's at the county level, but it's only about $150. And so I point out, because it's so simple here, there's a reason why we have 800 Elvises running around the state, because it is very easy to change your name. So once you get that done, for most people, you look next to your driver's license. Tennessee does have a surgical requirement, although the language in the state policy, it's a policy, not a law, so it's issued by the Department of Safety, says irreversible medical procedure to change gender. So medical doctors are writing that letter for them. You have to have a doctor's letter, and so just depends on how much you have done. And so people are able to navigate the system that way. Of course, then there's the birth certificates. Tennessee will allow you to change your name, but not your gender yet at the moment. Now, there were 3 states that had such a ban. Idaho and Ohio were the other 2. Both of those have now been overturned by federal courts. And so that leaves Tennessee only. And there is a case here filed in 2019 called Gore versus Lee, Kayla Gore of Memphis et al. Versus Governor Bill Lee. And that was filed in federal district court here in Nashville. And I've been told that they're expecting a ruling any day now. Now, that was almost a month ago. Who knows exactly what any day now means to lawyers. But we're hopeful that the federal courts here will follow up on what Ohio and Idaho federal courts said, and that they will be consistent, and that all 3 bans will be overturned before the end of this year. So that's what we're hoping for.
So you can get your name changed, but say you can't change gender on your driver's license.
Yeah, technically you can get 3 changes on your birth certificate: your name, your father, if it was discovered later that it was listed incorrectly, or if you're adopted, so you can change your parents that way. And so already Tennessee does change birth certificates for those 3 reasons, but that M or F, you're locked into. You can't change. And by the way, that covers not just trans people, it covers intersex people as well. And sometimes they're not sure, so they're like, well, we have to put something, so they just slap an M or an F on it, even if it's not medically accurate, because those are the only 2 options that they have.
Now, are there states that that do allow gender change?
Well, like I said, 47 states do.
Okay.
And by the way, Indiana removed gender from their birth certificates.
Oh, okay.
That's the best way. That's like, if there's no gender on birth certificates, you don't have to go through the process of changing it ever. And so Indiana's the model. That's the way we should be going.
Wow.
And by the way, I got my first passport, going back to federal documents, I got my first passport when I was 10, and there was no gender on that. And later, when I was older and I renewed it, they had added a gender category to the passports. Having that on there didn't prevent those terrorists from hijacking airplanes in 2001. And so, I don't think we need gender on those documents. I can understand the need for security, especially for flying. I want to know when I get on an airplane that I'm going to be safe. But we don't need gender on all those documents. And so the Indiana model is the way we should be going.
Who was responsible for that legislation in Indiana?
I have no idea. I've never really looked into that to find out what happened up there.
Yeah, that'd be good. That'd be interesting to look into. So I'm shocked it's Indiana.
Yeah, I think it was pre-Mike Pence.
Yeah, I'm sure. So talk about healthcare obstacles right now in the state.
Oh, well, geez, where do I begin? Well, for starters, as you know, for years, TennCare did not cover trans people. With the Affordable Care Act, at least we got that done. But as you know, the state of Tennessee under Governor Lee is refusing to expand Medicaid, and there are a lot of trans people who fall between the cracks. A lot of us will work in certain types of jobs that don't offer health insurance at all, so they're walking around with no health coverage whatsoever. And of course, we're in the process of coming out of a pandemic, and for all of those, and I'm sure some of those we've lost over the previous year were people who didn't have access to health care, and so they got sick and they didn't get diagnosed in time to get any reasonable treatment. And of course, in general, we failed even a lot of people who did have health care. And so, we're trying to deal with that. The Biden administration it pointed out that Medicare, Medicaid has sex discrimination bans similar to the Title VII ban that the Supreme Court ruled on last year. And so HHS has issued a ruling that if you take federal money from Medicare or Medicaid, you cannot discriminate against LGBTQ patients. And virtually every doctor, virtually every hospital in the entire country takes Medicare, Medicaid money. They're in the business of making money like all the rest of us. They have, doctors have to pay their bills too. I've had doctors in my family, so I understand that. And so they take federal money. They all do. And so they're being told, if you're going to take taxpayer dollars and LGBTQ people pay taxes, then you can't discriminate against any of them. So that's a huge step forward. Obviously, the past year, because of the pandemic, has been a challenge for everybody. I have not seen my primary care physician in over a year. She actually had gotten pregnant just before the pandemic, so I hadn't seen her for several months, and then came the lockdowns. So I've only been commuting telehealth since then. Although I've also had to start seeing a cardiologist in my old age, and so I have actually gone in to get EKGs twice a year, and I just went in about 2 weeks ago. And I'm in good health there. My heart's healthy. So at least I am able to see a doctor. But again, there are a lot of people who haven't. For some of those, especially in the rural areas where medical doctors are not well informed and are not supportive, ironically, telehealth has actually provided them an opportunity to meet with doctors, especially in bigger cities like Nashville, where the doctors are more open-minded, better informed. We'll see how that plays out as we now start to open up and people start to interact again in person. But having that federal ruling on our behalf is good. But again, that's a policy and interpretation of the Medicare, Medicaid language. And so the Equality Act does include healthcare in that language. So we need to solidify that in law so that if the next time there's a change in the administration, we don't want the next administration to say that this doesn't cover it, because we did see that under the previous administration. They were not supportive of healthcare for LGBTQ people.
But there's still discrimination. That's the problem. Even with federal, laws and regulations, there's still discrimination. It's going to take a long time to really work on that.
Yeah, we've been doing trainings in medical schools around the country. And so with a lot of fields, it's generational. So the older generation is still, hostile, but more and more we're seeing younger people coming out of medical school, starting their professional practice. And so they're more understanding. They've grown up with friends who are out. They've seen Will and Grace and other TV shows, and they're familiar with Laverne Cox and RuPaul, and so they've seen different images, and they're not frightened of them. They're not afraid of them.
Right. Who do you go to? Who can we go to stay informed? Like, what are your resources that you get information from? What organizations or sites can we go to stay up to date on what's going on?
Well, specifically for the trans community, we have three national groups. There's the National Center for Transgender Equality, which is based in Washington, D.C. I served on their board for 8 years. Out of New York, there's the Transgender Legal Defense Education Fund, and out of Oakland, California, the Transgender Law Center. Excuse me. So those are sort of the three big national groups. Um, of course, there are advocacy groups like the Human Rights Campaign. Again, I mentioned the American Civil Liberties Union, both national, and there's a state office right here in Nashville. Lambda Legal and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, I mentioned both of those groups. Those are also national groups that file a lot of the lawsuits. Lambda Legal actually has the birth certificate case here in Tennessee. And so ACLU, Lambda Legal, and NCLR, those three divide up the cases because there's so many. And so they kind of split them up depending on the state or locality around the country. And they try to complement each other. And even when one group takes the lead, the other two will often file amicus briefs in their particular cases. So you can go to those groups. Of course, PFLAG has a national chapter and several local chapters in Nashville, Franklin, and Clarksville. They serve families of LGBTQ people. And then GLSEN, that was an acronym, it stood for Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They work with the students, helping set up GSAs, or Gender Sexuality Alliances. They organize things like Day of Silence, which takes place every April, to try to highlight through silence our visibility in schools. And trying to provide peer support for LGBTQ students. So that's a lot of alphabets.
A lot, yeah. How many trans youth are there in Tennessee? I mean, do you have any statistics?
I think I've seen. I know GLSEN and NCTE have tried to do surveys to try to get some sort of census. But the number of people coming out is increasing almost every year, as more and more people, are seeing those role models, and saying, "Oh, that's somebody like me. I can be like that person," whether in entertainment or in politics. And so it's kind of hard to get a sense. We estimate, in terms of trans people, it's probably somewhere between 0.1 and 1%. For the LGBTQ community as a whole, it might be as high as 10%. Of course, a lot of more and more are coming out also as gender non-binary, and so we are including them in the transgender umbrella.
Yeah, good deal. So a lot. So give me a short history on when transgender legislation started. Or where did it start? Like we have Stonewall, we have these markers of when we started really wanting legislation for our rights as taxpayers. What about transgender legislation?
I know. If you give me a second here, I'm trying to see. I know Minnesota was the pioneer. The city of Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, they were the first. And I'm just trying to see where. I got so much stuff here. my other computer. I know they started passing trans inclusive laws in the late 70s.
Okay.
So they were ahead of, I think, 78 or 79 for the city of Minneapolis. So they were ahead of everybody. Of course, at the federal level, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act was introduced in 1994, but without trans inclusion. And we fought for over a decade to get into that bill. And were finally only added on the House side in 2007. And then the Senate version didn't add us until 2009. So that's barely a decade ago. So we fought long and hard, and pointed out that Minnesota was passing its laws in the 70s and 80s, prior even to the introduction, excuse me, of the original INDA without us. Um, and but the momentum really picked up in this century. And we just have seen this explosion at the local level and at the state level around the country only in the last 20 years. And part of it is the trans community getting more politically organized, but part of it is people actually listening to us. And for years, there were a lot of people who refused to listen.
Yeah, it seems like education is getting out there everywhere. Like you were saying, in hospitals, in schools, just in our social lives. Because I don't know if there's any hope for the lawmakers in Tennessee unless they get voted out. I mean, what can we do? There's not a lot we can do with so many.
Yeah, okay, I found what I was looking for. Minnesota's state law passed in 1993, so they were the first 1 year. And again,
Okay.
the city of Minneapolis was before that. And then we don't see another one at the state level until Rhode Island in 2001. But we've had a whole bunch in this century. But again, prior to the 21st century, Minnesota stood alone. Again, starting in 1993. And by the way, the governor who signed that, Arne Carlson, was a Republican.
Well, that's good news, I guess.
Yeah.
There's hope. I guess we'll end on, how do we approach lawmakers? Because we live in Davidson County and our lawmakers are great here. What can we do statewide? I think we're all at a loss.
Yeah, I've been increasingly talking to people about rural organizing. A lot of people move to Nashville from other counties, so you still have some friends or supportive relatives back home. You need to reach back out to those people. And even if you don't have friends or relatives in rural counties, if you didn't grow up one, certainly for those of us in Nashville, we're surrounded by red counties, and they want our support. They need people to knock on doors, to make phone calls, to donate money. I haven't done door knocking in the neighboring counties, but I've done phone calls and I've made financial donations to help the local county parties. And so anything and everything you can do to help them. So we can flip Wilson, Sumner, Rutherford, Williamson, Cheatham, Robertson. If all of those counties, they're asking for help. And those of us in Davidson County, we're talking about a short drive. Or if you do pick up a phone, I mean, you don't have to even leave your home. And so we have the ability to assist our neighbors. And certainly we shouldn't forget the challenges in Davidson County. A couple of our districts are marginal, and this is a redistricting year. And the Republicans are going to redraw those lines behind closed doors, and they're going to do everything they can to screw Democrats over. And so we need to be vigilant in Davidson County. But we should make every effort to support our neighbors. And one way or another, I think all of us have the ability to do something to help our neighbors. So ask them what they need, and then let's see what we can do to provide that assistance.
Yeah, that was kind of the same feel I got about education. We need to work with our neighboring counties near us to see what their schools need and just kind of branch out from there. So that makes sense, instead of trying to contact people statewide who may or may not listen to you. Go to our neighbors. So that sounds like a good plan. What else? What else do we need to know?
Like I said, be vigilant. Well, I just mentioned redistricting. For those who do have Republican legislators, demand the process be open and transparent. It wasn't last time. They did it behind closed doors, and they didn't post any of the maps until after the votes. And so saying we as taxpayers, as citizens, as voters, we deserve to see what those lines look like before the votes. And it's Republicans And people in those rural counties, even if they don't have to be Republican, just say, I'm a voter in this district. I want to see those lines before you all vote on them. I deserve that. And
Yeah.
we've got to insist on that to make sure that those lines are fair and representative, and not let them get away with doing it behind closed doors. And then again, for especially on LGBTQ issues, or diversity anyway. We talked about the critical race theory bill. Talk about why this legislation is bad, and why we as Tennesseans have to stand up with each other and for each other. We can't allow them to think they have a free pass. And when people say inappropriate things, to call them out, to remind them that those inappropriate statements are no longer acceptable. It's a different world.
Great. Well, thanks for your time today. And we'll keep in touch, and we'll get those resources out where we can stay updated on everything that's happening, because things happen really fast. So we've got to keep up with it. But thanks for your time, and I appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Marisa. Bye-bye.